I'm very excited because Mary Vernon and I are going to have a show at Southern Methodist University in September. And I'm not sure exactly what Mary's going to do, but at least right now it's kind of a retrospective.
Sure.
And so I just have been pulling up many of these photographs, and I'm talking to you about these series.
Yeah.
They're in my mind because they probably will be in this show. And I'm really excited to have a chance to sort of see, a kind of continuity.
Sure.
And
well, in my mind, photography is one of those things where, sometimes you can take so many images over so many years that you can sometimes go back and be surprised by what you find, because it's almost impossible that you can remember every single image, right? And so, in my mind, that would be a delightful undertaking to go back and, rediscover something that maybe, your eye 40 years ago overlooked.
Well, that's interesting, and I was actually hoping that I would find some gems that I had and I really looked hard for them, and I ended up sort of settling surprisingly on what I had liked before. Right. But I was really digging around. Now, the advantage of a photographer versus a painter is the painter has to hold on to everything, or if they're sold, they're gone, or you can't, you're moving and you can't carry everything. Where I just have boxes and boxes of contact sheets and negatives. I have my whole, and I don't think this is true now, but I do think that for many photographers, there is a kind of motivation that's related to hoarding, or that I can't let things go. I have to arrest them and stop them, freeze them, and by photographing them, somehow that makes it permanent.
Right.
So I luckily have a large archive.
Yeah, I recently heard an interview with a person who was a photographer who all of their stuff was in a basement that was flooded during when the hurricane hit New York. And it was, just to have your life's work. Yeah. It's slipping.
Yeah, I think I read that too. It was...
And just, that would be scary to worry about, how to archive.
Yeah. Well, now there's a similar problem, though. Richard Mishrak many years ago had a fire in his where he stored his negatives, and that everyone heard about that, and it was horrible. But now we have to do backup. You have to do backup because you could lose things, and it wouldn't have to be a fire or a flood.
Right.
And yet, painters don't have the same worry. And I think that there's a lot more spontaneity in painters than in photographers. I don't think they come to it wanting to hold on. I don't know, as much as not all photographers, but many of us.
And I wonder if that's just by nature, this kind of the transient nature of capturing the image. Like, hey, here's this moment that I'm capturing. Yeah. The elements are never going to be the same. Right. I could try to rearrange this scene, but the light's not going to be the same. Versus a painter, especially with the amount of vibrato that, painters have, I can always do it again.
And I think that the whole making things, I think painters like the kinetic, the manipulative, the tactility, all of that kind of material stuff in which they push and pull and then they can change it. And it's a different where they're making, and I mean, I know now that I'm making an image, but it had felt in the past like you're taking it. Let
me ask you, I saw where you had done some research on Wallace Kirkland, who is a I know I find these things, and so you had done. And I was wondering how that, so Wallace Kirkland was a famous life photographer,
somewhat famous, active,
right? And I think I read where he was also from Oak Park. And
you must. I don't even know what you read. That must be. I don't know where that. It must be on the website.
I found it somewhere in an old CV somewhere, and it was interesting to me because those old. It's this dichotomy, right? I mean, Life magazine doesn't really, it doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. Those photo essays that those guys would do, mm-hmm. The Wallace Kirklands, the Eugene Smiths, right, were amazing, right? But now, we have people just more and more images going out there, but those were crafted around these narratives and documenting. I'm just curious, the research that you had done there. How did it, I assume it informed your aesthetic at some point, or maybe you can tell me what were you digging into there?
Well, actually, that's interesting because I would say that I did not necessarily admire Kirkland's photographs, and it, just like so many other things in life, there's this serendipitous quality.
Right.
And so after I graduated with my BA in English, and I loved photography, I got a job in a camera store. And it turned out, I thought, I'll learn something. But all I did was fill out photo finishing envelopes saying your prints will be back on Wednesday. But there was a man who worked there part-time at the camera store, and he said there's a retired life photographer who lives in Oak Park who had a stroke, and he likes people to come and visit him. And so he took me over to meet Wallace Kirkland, who lived in a big Victorian house and filled with beautiful photographs and had a lovely wife, and he was confined to a wheelchair. And I'd go over there and sort of, pay homage to him in a way because he had worked for Life magazine and he was old and I wanted to learn whatever I could from him. Well, as it turned out, Cornell Kappa, who started the International Center for Photography in New York, was thinking that he wanted to do a series of books on photographers who were not so well known, who had been kind of contemporaries of his brother, Robert Kappa. So he came to Oak Park because he knew Kirk and said, and asked me, would you go through all of Kirk's work and organize it into contact sheets and send me all that, and I will decide whether he's good enough to have a book made of him. So he gave me a grant, my first grant, and so I would go up in the third floor attic in the heat of the summer, and I would make a double set of contacts and organize it and all of this stuff. And and then eventually I went to New York and delivered it all to Cornell. And it turned out he didn't make a book of Kirk's work. And Kirk's work was, I would say, he was not one of the great life photographers. And his own story is interesting, which in that it involved them hiring people when there wasn't a lot of incredible competition. He was good, but he was not like, the best. But it did hook me into Cornell Kappa, and then even when I applied to RISD, I don't know if I had Cornell Kappa write a letter of recommendation. So here I was, this person who didn't really know much about careerism. Now people would plot all that out and, maneuver and go to a party and make sure they work the room and everything. But I was so naive at the time, but I was just going from the guy working at the camera store, taking me to this guy's house, and then, so utilizing opportunities when they came my way.
So, one of the things I've always said that I really try to live my life without any regrets. And so looking back on those 5 or 6 years that you're navigating there, is there something you would have done differently? That, I mean, knowing now, if you had known then what you know now, is there anything that you would have navigated differently there?
Well, I have regrets, and I think about regrets all the time, and I think about regrets in relationship to ambition. And I tell myself and my children, you have regrets only because you have ambition. And ambition, you're never going to satisfy your ambition. So the shadow side is you're always going to have regrets.
Interesting.
I've had regrets later on, but I don't think in those formative years of 5 years or graduate school or coming to Dallas in those early years, I haven't identified easily regrets that I for those years.
So the regrets are further
Later
down. No, but it's interesting. I as a painter, I feel like, well, I'll just say as an artist, I will create work and I think it's great, and then my taste only gets more and more refined. Mm-hmm. And work I was in love with when I finished it, 2 years later, I look back at it and I'm like, I wish it were, that, I think it's the only place I have regrets. It's like, man, I wish, maybe if I had put in more hours, maybe my taste could have gotten more refined quicker, more quickly. And, but it's so hard trying to, get to a point of that, self-fulfillment there, because it's such a moving scale, like the better you get, the higher your own standard is, right? And so it's like it's like it's the reason people are addicted to golf, right? No one's ever going to go out and shoot an 18, right? You're not going to. So there's always, even if you went out and shot a 65, which is an amazing score, you'll remember, well, there was that one putt I missed. I could have shot a 64, 63. And so it just sounded like there was something there where you wished that it could have gone in a little bit different direction. Is that?
I think that no, not from. I mean, I think that when I did my little laundry series and then the people looking out at sea, I was not as competent with the camera as I became, and it was almost making up for a lack of undergraduate photography. So I had to do a lot, and what I got was a little. But I shot so much that I still got enough to get me through. Then I distinctly remember when I did the hospice series, the very first time that I went to meet a patient and photographed him in their home environment, I thought I was made for this. You and your website talk about an emotional kind of quality. There was something that was so right about it. And so for every time that I photographed anybody, and I photographed a lot of people over the years, I always could get a picture. I knew where to stand. I knew what to do.
Sure.
And it was almost like unconscious. And I think it was that I had finally gone through, whatever the learning curve or the performance curve, where you have a lot of failures and a few successes. I was, finally cooking with gas. And so, and that happened through the baby series and the waiting series. And I feel if there's any regret I have is that I didn't turn those into a book. And they reflect one problem I've had in that when I do the work, I like doing the work. I like making the prints.